Wow, so I'm Dave Evans, and I'm here with Garry Mize, and we're going to talk a little bit about leadership. Now, we both work with Exxon. We are business advisors.
Yes.
And we help businesses handle challenges. And one of our favorite topics with Mr. Mize here is leadership. And I think it's good to understand for companies to understand the importance of being a good leader and not necessarily a manager. What are your thoughts on leadership, Garry? What is your overview? I mean, your thoughts on leadership.
Leadership is an interesting topic, and I would imagine that anyone that is a good leader doesn't know it until after the fact. And it's something that I'm striving for in my family, in leading my kids, not in a misogynist way, but leading my wife. However I can do that, and obviously those translate to what we do in work as well. But leadership has been something that I think people pay attention to and are drawn to. But again, I go back to that original statement. I don't know if you know you're a good leader until after, but I think you certainly know it when you're experiencing it too, though.
I think that's a fact, and you said something funny about leadership at home, and I just want everybody to know that I'm not the leader of my wife, and I'm going to tell you a really quick funny story about that. I spent a lot of time deploying, and when you deploy for months on end, you leave the family at home, and whoever's back at home, the spouse, typically is in charge. We found out early in our marriage with the children that I like to be the leader at home, and my wife quickly put me in line to let me know when I got back, me coming back and trying to change things back the way I thought they should be was a bad idea. So we agreed that she would take on that role at the house, and I would be her partner in crime with the kids. So I just want to say good luck with that.
Yeah, very sensitive.
I learned the hard way. But he makes a great point, and the great point is if you're a really good leader, you don't know it until it's over. And I'm going to share a quick story on that too. I retired a few years ago from my previous life, and I went back to Tinker Air Force Base to visit, and I never thought of myself as a great leader. I love my team. I love the men and women I served with. But I walked into my old squadron, and I had 3 people come up and scream, "Snapper!" and all give me a hug. And like you said, that was the moment I realized I must have done something okay for people to give me a hug.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shouldn't be hugging your employees, just as a general rule. But I thought it was interesting that he said that because it really reminded me of that day in my life when I realized maybe I did something right.
Well, earlier in the summer, I had a chance to go to Washington, D.C., and we spent a day at Mount Vernon. And the first part of that day, we spent at the George Washington Leadership Institute.
Nice.
And we heard from a couple of presenters speaking on that very topic, leadership, but through the eyes and life of George Washington. One of the things that hit me when we were listening was the fact that, and I probably should have known this before, and probably did, but it was just presented in such a way that it kind of hit you in the face. But he was creating a country and government and a so to speak, set of governing rules. And
a value system.
He was doing so in leading and leadership, but didn't really. Well, he may have known, but I would imagine that there were a number of things that he was doing that just seemed natural and normal to him. That after the fact, if he were to look back on it, and certainly we all do.
Sure, studied all the time.
Absolutely, that was what that institute was for, was looking at his leadership. But he probably didn't know it at the time. And certainly didn't know it was going to last as long as it did.
Well, I think in a lot of cases, the first thing good leaders have that lead great teams is they have a set of standards and values, and they hold their team to those standards and values. They're shared, they're agreed upon, and I think if you go back to George Washington's day, he wrote a lot about leadership. He even wrote what's called the Rules of Civility, and I've mentioned that to you. But that was the founding values of how to be a proper citizen, how to behave with your neighbors, how to treat other people with respect. And I think that lesson you learned at the Institute is probably one of the best lessons that a leader can understand is the importance of values and upholding standards in your organization.
Well, 2 things. One, I ordered that book. It's actually arriving today
Awesome.
at my house. But 2, with regards to George Washington and leadership, He didn't know that. He didn't know that at the time, but it had just become so ingrained in me. When we were there, they were talking about the relationship that he had with the community and the respect that he had. So for them to come to him and ask him to operate in whatever capacity of leadership it was based on his reputation. That was a big deal. So he didn't find his way there by asserting authority. He was just naturally put in those positions and rose to that level. That spoke a lot to me as well.
So I'm going to share a little thing about Garry and myself. We both got to play sports for a long time. And the reason I say that, I'm going to kind of intro this question this way. When you look back on your life, and I can do it too, who were the coaches, what were the things about the coaches that were successful on your team, that led teams that were successful teams? And how did you feel about those coaches? What traits did you take from those coaches as leaders that you carried into your life?
I could think of two specifically, two different sports. And one was baseball and one was running cross country. I
knew you were crazy. Runners, you got all my power. I run if I'm being chased.
Yeah, I'm a little crazy. That coach, that cross country coach, said something at a speech when he was inducted into the Guthrie Sports Hall of Fame. It was the first class, so I believe I was a senior in high school. We went to the banquet. He was giving his speech, and I grew up with this man. He was a deacon at our church, and he was a coach as well, so I was around him quite a bit. But one thing that he said in his speech was he gave credit to the athletes. And I thought that was a big deal. So as a 17-year-old kid, I heard that, and I've remembered it and thought about it. He was humble. He knew that he could give the best advice, but if it wasn't followed, it didn't really matter. So he gave credit to his employees, his players, so to speak. That was a big deal to me. I mean, he said, I never ran one of those miles. I just told them what to do, and I supported them in doing it. So that was a big deal, and that just kind of encompassed who he was. He's been successful his whole career, from when he started the program in '84 until now. And he eventually handed over the reins, but he's still there working in some assistant capacity. With baseball, it was a little different. It was a little different, but I had a really wonderful coach that, I guess the best way to sum it up is he would not let me give up. He saw something and he knew it was there, and he was not going to give up until he saw it. That's the best way to explain it.
So let me summarize this for our business, because Garry just made some really good points. His cross-country coach, his track coach, basically set the standard and gave the team the tools to go do what they needed to do to be successful.
Yeah.
That applies to every business. It applies to every government. It applies to every organization you're in. The second one, which is even more important, is he saw the value in talent in individuals and pushed them to reach their full potential. Yeah. Fair statement? I mean, is that an accurate way to describe what you're talking about? Great.
He found talent all over the place.
Those leaders are special. Those leaders, they can see something in every person that's positive, empowers the organization, and makes the organization stronger.
Yeah.
Exponentially. Because I don't care who you are, I don't care what you do, you add value to the organization. There's the quote, treat the janitor the same way you treat the CEO.
I said it to a group of kids just the other day.
Absolutely.
I was talking on on Saturday to a group of Boy Scouts, and we were talking about leadership and government and community. But I said that very thing to them. Each one of you has something unique and special that only you can deliver to the communities that you find yourself in.
No, that's a fact, and I'm going to talk about Northern Hills here in Edmond real quick. There is a ground superintendent at Northern Hills. Mm-hmm. Great man. I had the pleasure of watching my kids grow up with him in the school, and the values my children learn about how to treat other people came from this man who kept the grounds at Northern Hills. Most respectful, nicest person I've met, but he really cared about those kids, and he poured into them leadership lessons. So what I'll tell you as a business owner, as a leader is you don't know where leadership's going to come from. You don't know who they are or what they're going to do, but you need to seek it out and push those people to expand their influence in your organization.
I think good leaders find that to be the case. You don't know where it's going to come from, so they're always looking and always paying attention. I said this very thing to these kids too. I said, you have 2 eyes and 2 ears, 1 mouth. Use them accordingly. That's not a new statement, but I was telling them, look, you can, just by paying attention, you probably gather more by looking and listening. And that's something that I've always done, tried to at least pay attention and assess the situation. But there's a really good book on that. Whatever it is that you're doing it well and bringing value to that position, called the Fred Factor.
I haven't read that one, so I've got a book for the list, the Fred Factor. I'm gonna applaud Garry for his comments. I'm gonna give you a task. If you lead an organization and you go to your next meeting, I want you to keep your mouth shut. I don't want you to say a word. I want you to sit at the table and I want you to listen, like Garry said, listen to your team. You will be amazed at what you learn by asking the right questions and listening to their perspective. But guess what? Their perspective in the field, in the organization, is different than yours at your desk at the CEO's chair.
Yeah.
And you can gain a lot of wisdom about what's the culture and climate of your organization just by walking around and listening and paying attention in meetings and listening before you speak.
You probably saw that in the military too. I was listening to the culture code. I'm trying to finish that one up. I've been busy and haven't been diligent in my listening, but they were talking about special forces, specifically SEAL Team 6, and I think they call it AAR. After they run a mission, they have
the after action report.
After action report,
Yep, yeah, absolutely.
I would imagine that the leaders of those probably do a lot more listening in those meetings than they do talking, because then you get all of the information. Then you can go back and make an assessment. But everybody has a voice at the table. They expect you to speak and talk and add to the meeting. I think that's.
Well, Garry brings up a point, and I'll tell you this: a debrief and after action report is an interesting environment. And if you're not doing that in your company, you need to have a debrief after y'all have a major project, you have something going on, and this is why. In a flight debrief, all the rank is off the shoulders.
Yeah, that's right.
Everybody at the table in the debriefing room is equal, and everybody's input is heard and documented. And then training happens.
Yep.
And what I mean by that is if there was a mistake by a junior member of the team or even a senior member of the team, that mistake is discussed and walked through step by step to ensure it doesn't happen again. See, it's okay to fail. And that's what I learned in flight debriefs. It's okay to make a mistake.
Yeah.
It's not okay not to understand what your mistake was and not to fix it. That's the value for every team out there in the military, and that's why they do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, and it's a little different perspective on leadership, but if you can approach it from that angle, that it's okay that you failed, let's figure out why, and let's make a plan around not doing that again. Well, when you talk about it and you finish it out, you're like, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense.
Well, what lessons are learned, right? That's how you get better.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can't not try new things if you try new things, you're going to fail. It's a fact. If you don't try new things, you're going to stagnate.
Right.
So the whole point of that debrief process is when you're doing different new things, what worked, what didn't, why didn't what didn't work not work, and how do you prevent that from happening the next time? And that applies to every company. I had a friend tell me years ago, you're either moving forward or you're moving backwards. You're never in the same place.
I think a key to that, though, this is me just thinking off the cuff, but I think a key to that, you said, in the after action report, all of the rank is off the table.
Yep.
That sets the stage for communication.
Open, honest
communication. And there's another example. What I was thinking about when I was listening to that was King Arthur's court and the round table. That was the idea of that. There was no head of the table. That was creating an environment where it was safe, but creating an environment where there was also vulnerability. You were safe to be vulnerable in that, so that there was better communication. And again, that goes back to the book, The Culture Code. That is a key element to successful organizations, It's
No doubt.
vulnerability that is shown and offered from the leadership down.
So Gary hits on a great point here, and that's vulnerability equates to trust.
Yeah, absolutely.
And trust is the founding core of your organization. If there's not trust in your organization, start over. Agreed?
Yeah. You don't have a choice really, because you won't anything that comes after that is going to be ineffective.
It's going to be a train wreck.
It'll be a train.
And you're going to have middle managers, going after middle managers, and you're going to have a train wreck in your organization below you because there's a lack of trust.
Yeah.
So the key takeaway from this is be vulnerable, be open to feedback, be willing to give the appropriate feedback no matter what level you are in the organization. Tell the boss the truth. That doesn't mean whine, but when you tell the boss the truth, or when you're working with your people, ensure they're always providing a solution.
Yeah.
We had a phrase, I always had a phrase that I still do, don't be a pigeon. Don't fly into my office, poop on my desk, and leave a mess, right? If there's a mess in the unit or the organization, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what solution you have, and then go try it and see if it works.
Yeah. It creates or displays humility on behalf of the leadership. So you are saying in your willingness to host that meeting and have those debriefs, I don't have all the answers.
We are talking about culture, and we were talking about things. And the one thing I wanted to add to the culture piece, I think the biggest challenge for young people in culture, and you see it in school, you see it in sports, you see it in young people in organizations, is lack of accountability.
Yeah.
Supervisors and leaders are unwilling to make the hard call and hold their team accountable. What do you think about that?
You're probably right. So in that environment, you have to have two things. You have to have a leader that's willing to hold individuals that she is leading accountable, but you have to have those that are willing to be held accountable.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that.
I have to be willing to hear at times, hey, you said you were going to do this, you only made it this far, and that's a problem, and we need to fix it. So that takes humility, and it takes me being willing to be vulnerable in a relationship, and there was a disappointment or not an expectation made, something. So it goes back to the things that we said before, and you paint this picture where we have to have all of those pieces really to have successful relationship and successful outcomes in business, sports, home, churches.
So let me ask you a question. So you're leading a team, and you have people on the team that are unwilling to be accountable. How do you handle that?
There's only one way. If you've decided as an organization, these are our goals, and those individuals were part of that discussion, and they said they are working towards this, and you've also then outlined, here's how we get there. If you're not willing to be held accountable along the way, then you aren't really fulfilling your obligations from the onset that you said these are our goals and these are the things that I'm willing to do to get there. It's tough, but
it's the truth. And for business owners and leaders, and we're going through this with a company right now, is that you have to find the people that buy in and are part of the shared vision for the team. You have to enable those people, but at the same time, you have to get rid of the antibodies in your organization. The people that are saying the boss is stupid all the time, or the coach is a bad coach, or this, that, or the other, those people are toxic.
It is toxic, and so you have to be willing to be held accountable as a leader. This was in a devotional that I was reading not too long ago, and you and I discussed this. But leaders owe the vision of what they're trying to accomplish to those that they are leading. So if I come to you and I tell you, hey, this isn't meeting this expectation, I can't just leave it there.
That's fair.
That creates some dissension, animosity. But if I'm willing to say, hey, this isn't what I was looking for, and here's why, and here's how we can get back on track, I just shared vision with you. And I owe that to you.
Absolutely. I agree 100%.
So that is full circle. If I don't do the second part of that, I leave it open-ended, and then you go back to your office or wherever, it just kind of rubs you the wrong way.
So Garry once again is just hitting all these key points about leadership, and it's communication, right? That open, vulnerable communication. You got to tell your team what you want. You can't presuppose that they know what you're thinking, because they don't.
Yeah.
I mean, at the foundational level, you need to communicate your message, your vision, your expectations on a daily basis so the team knows where you're headed, what's going on, and what's next.
Well, you're fooling yourself as a leader of any organization team. If you haven't done those things, they might hit it accidentally. I'd rather hit that target on purpose, though. Yeah.
You're going to leave it a chance, Garry. We're going to leave it to chance, brother. Let's see what happens as the money's rolling out the door. Excellent point. Excellent point. The last thing I want to talk about then when we talk about leadership is, what are leadership challenges you see today as a parent with the way the world's changing, and as a leader of younger people? Because I mean, I'll be honest, I'm half 100 right now, so I've been around the block, so I'm the old guy. Gary's about 25, so he's not quite as old, but
from the hair down.
There is the ongoing millennial discussion that they don't get it. I'll argue that they do. I'll argue that you're not communicating effectively. What challenges do you see effectively communicating with younger generations and leading them?
It's a really good question. I wish that I had more context here for you for that group of millennials. It's an interesting one, and those that figure that out have huge opportunity for success. I think, well, you know what? I don't think it's really much different than probably some things that your dad said to you.
Yeah, fair.
It's just figuring out how to communicate it, what medium that is, or their why. I think that may be the biggest issue with millennials. It's their why.
So wait, no, I think you hit on a really, really good point, and I'm going to use this example because we talked about my dad. You know, when I did something wrong when I was a kid, I got a butt whooping, right? That's just the way.
Yeah.
In 1970, when you screwed up, you got put over and you got a spanking.
We did too.
Today, that doesn't get through to younger people. So the stick, I guess the point is, the stick approach is not the approach. And I found this with my teenagers, is if we sit down and have if I don't yell and we sit down and have a conversation and we have that clear that vulnerable communication, that, look, I expected you to do A, you did B, this is why I don't want you to do A and why I want you to do B, you get a much different response, and you get a very positive response. And I think this is tied to the amount of information that young people have today that I didn't have in 1970. I had 3 channels and a rotary phone, right? So
it was easier to make a decision.
It was a lot easier to make a decision.
We've as parents, we have read, Jen and I have read some information, been exposed to information on that. You know, if you have paralysis by analysis, right? I have so many options that I get stuck. Whereas if I have 2, you got a 50-50 chance of being right, you know? So there's something to that. But again, I go back to the why, and it may be a timing issue. So this paradigm shift from your gen, my gen to the millennials, we may be so close to that changeover that we're not quite there yet, and ultimately we'll be gone. But I mean, that's kind of a perpetual thing. But I think it gets down to the why, and that may not be just unique to millennials. I think it's everybody. Are we identifying for those that we are leading? What is their why? Why are they here? What do they hope to accomplish? And am I speaking to that? And that all may be junk.
I think that you're right. I think that your comment about the why is right on the mark. And the reason I say this is that I believe in my heart of hearts that people are genuinely good people.
I do too.
I mean, I think that, and I think a lot of times we get crossways because we hear something, or our mind runs us down a track that's not absolutely true, and we don't understand the expectation or the why, and therefore we fail, right? And when we fail, we get frustrated, and we say things we shouldn't say.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're key there, and maybe just maybe all these scholars that are saying it's a generational thing are wrong. Maybe we were all the same way, and maybe our great grandparents had the same conversations we're having today.
Maybe somebody's going to see this and accept that as their challenge to figure out how exactly do I reach that group of people, and maybe we could plug them for a percentage of the money that they make, for getting that idea from us.
But again, history's a great teacher,
Yeah.
and that's why I mentioned the thing about grandparents and great grandparents. I'm the older I get, and the more I see, the more I'm willing to accept that maybe this is just a ongoing challenge of we've gotten to where we don't communicate well as we get older because we're the senior person. We're right, darn it, right? And maybe we're not. Maybe we're wrong sometimes. And maybe that's a frustration that younger people see because my daughter, how do you share photos on Facebook, right? How do you build a shared album? And they're going, Dad, you're a moron.
Yeah.
And whipping you through it. And so we're not caught up with the reality that they're living.
It is very different. And so I think you could probably take, each 20-year time frame from when our country was founded until now and see these major shifts. But this might be something that our dad said, but it's not like it used to be. It just isn't the way it was when we grew up. And that's very true.
It is true
right now. Now we wouldn't be where we are without a previous way to do it, but it's getting to the point where it's so much easier and faster to do just about anything.
Oh, no doubt. That
there is a lot coming at you at any one point in time. But you just have to figure out. I think I continue to go back to you have to find out what their reason is. What is their why? Because take my son for example. He'll focus on certain things. I just have to figure out why it is those things, and then how do we bridge the gap to the things that you need to focus on for the time, right? It may not be the most exciting or what you would pick in a perfect day, but it is what you have in front of you. So let's try to bridge that gap and take that passion over here to here and accomplish this. And so you got to make that transition, figure out what the why is.
Well, if you guys figure that out for us, will you put a comment below for us? We would appreciate that. With that, this discussion on leadership has some pretty big takeaways. Got to develop trust. You got to be vulnerable. Got to have open communication. You have to be willing to understand people with different views. You have to be willing to listen and understand their perspective. And I think that goes to their why. Why do they feel the way they do? Why do they have the beliefs they do? Why? What can you do to better understand people you're talking to? And the last thing, and it's back from George Washington, is be civil. As a leader, always be civil. Always do your best to be professional and courteous. It costs you nothing. And I think our country, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're in a big leadership gap now because we have a lot of people that like to throw mud and not really have that really heartfelt conversation to listen to differing views and opinions. Is that fair?
I think it's fair. Yeah. I'll come back to the question, am I willing to walk a mile in your shoes?
Because everybody's shoes are different.
Maybe the answer is maybe I find the answer in your shoes.
You will find the perspective, that's for certain.
Yeah.
You will understand where they came from.
We find perspective, we find the answer, because until we do that, better stated.
It's a fair statement. So, with that, Gary and I, we are out of here.